Anytime you're manually focusing, a focus aid could be, well, a lot of help. Now on the R5, there are several focus aids built into the camera, but today we are going to take a look at just one, magnification. What's up everybody, I'm Jason and welcome back to some more tips and tricks for the Canon EOS R5. Now of all the focusing aids, magnification can be both the most accurate and the most limiting. It can provide the most accuracy because you can zoom in to near 1:1 pixel scale and you're visually looking at it, you can ensure that whatever is in the magnified part of the image is as sharp as it can possibly be, or at least that you can possibly tell. However, since you have to do this manually, it is incredibly hard to do this when there's any kind of movement, whether that be subject motion, your camera moving, and of course, because you have to do this visually, you are alone and judging just how sharp the actual part or sharpest point is. Now, compounding matters. When the camera or when magnification is enabled, your camera will disable all of the built-in focusing aids. So there's no focus guide or peaking available when zoomed in to help you. However, if you are working with an autofocus lens and autofocus is enabled, autofocus will still be available and still function. Now, to activate magnification on the R5, as well as Canon's other photo cameras, you use the dedicated magnification button found here. This button cannot have its functions reprogrammed through the camera button customization system. However, if you really use magnification a lot and don't find the dedicated magnify button convenient for you, you can customize any of the other customizable buttons, except of course for the shutter release and multi-controller, to act as the magnify image button. Now, that said, this additional magnify reduce button does not work any differently from the default one, which means you cannot set up a magnify while held button or something to that effect that you can just hold while you want to look at the magnified image to, say, quickly check focus, or something like that. Now, when pressing the magnify button, the camera will cycle through 3 different magnification levels. On the R5, these are 1x, 6x, and 15x magnification, 1x being when you can see the whole picture, 15x being the most magnified. For Canon's lower resolution cameras like the R6, R3, or even the 34 megapixel R7, the magnification ratios are 1x, 5x, and 10x. Now, in the 2 magnified views, the camera will make a few changes to the information that's overlaid on the display. To start with, most of the extra information that you might have displayed normally will be hidden. The camera will still display the shots remaining, magnification level, exposure settings, meter bar, a virtual recenter focus position button, and a graphical representation of where the magnified area falls in the frame as a whole. That said, I want to call your attention to a couple of things that are interesting, let's say, in the magnified view. First is that your shutter speed and aperture values will turn red. Now, I have no idea what this is intended to signify other than the image is magnified, as both of these settings can be changed while the image is magnified. Likewise, you can still use the depth of field preview function in photo mode to cause the camera to stop down and show you the actual depth of field, and in movie mode, the camera maintains the set aperture and shutter speeds even when the image is magnified. Now, additionally, you might have also noticed that there is a star icon above the position indication area and to the left of the magnified level. Now, while this looks a lot like the exposure lock star, as best I can tell, this simply indicates that the magnification is locked to the level that you've set and has absolutely nothing to do with anything else, for example, locking your exposure settings. Now, when activated, the magnified view is centered at the current autofocus position. If you have one of the large AF area methods enabled, then that point will be the center of that area box. Now, unfortunately, magnification cannot be used with the face plus tracking AF method. So if you are using that and you want to use magnification, you'll have to switch to one of the other autofocus methods. Now, when manual focus is active, the camera will zoom in at the last position of the autofocus point as well. Now, if you have the focus guide function enabled, which can be found on the AF5 menu page, then you can move the focus magnification point without having to enter the magnified view at any time. Otherwise, if the guide is not displayed, then you cannot move the magnification point with a manual focus setting or in manual focus mode without entering the magnified view. And speaking of moving the magnified view, because it and the AF point are the same, if you move the magnifier around the image, even in manual focus mode, the autofocus point will change to reflect that new position. Now, moving the magnifier uses many of the same methods as you would use to move the AF point, and I have a video on moving the AF point that you could check out if you would like. When the focus guide function is enabled, you can pre-position the magnifier at any time by, again, moving the focus guide the same way you would move the AF point. All of the standard methods apply. However, when the image is magnified, you can only use the multi-controller and touch screen to move the magnifier, and they behave a little differently than moving an autofocus point. When using the multi-controller, think about what you're doing as basically moving the magnifier box over or around the image. That is, if you push the stick to the left, the magnifier moves towards the left side of the picture. If you are using the touch screen, then you will need to touch and drag to move the magnifier. There are no virtual buttons or anything like that that you can use to just incidentally tap your way along. Now, when using the touch interface, Canon uses natural scrolling. That is, you can think of your finger when you touch the screen as being fixed to that part of the picture. And when you move your finger, wherever you move your finger, that part of the image will stay under it. Put another way, if you drag your finger to the left across the screen, the magnified area will move towards the right side of the picture, not the left. Now, of course, magnification also works when you use the EVF, and in this case, the touch screen can also be used if you have touch and drag autofocus enabled. When using touch and drag in the magnified view, natural scrolling is also used. Now, all of this is not without some limitations. To start with, magnification does not persist through any of the camera menus. In other words, if you're looking at the magnified image and jump to the menus to change something, when you return out of the menus, the camera will no longer be in the magnified mode. This also includes the quick control menu and the dial function menu as well. Secondly, magnification is activated on all of the camera displays and outputs simultaneously, and you cannot control this. So that means the LCD, EVF, and HDMI connection will all be magnified. Now, since this includes the HDMI output, when in movie mode, even if you have the HDMI display setting found on the Shoot 8 menu page set to Camera Plus Monitor, the HDMI output will be magnified as well. Or, put another way, you cannot use the magnification on the R5 while recording on an external monitor unless you want the recorded image magnified in the process. Magnification is also not available when you are in movie mode with HDMI raw output enabled. However, magnification can be used with internal raw recording. Finally, magnification cannot be used, as I said, when the camera is set to face plus tracking AF. If you want to use it for that, then you will need to switch your AF method. Now, as I noted earlier, magnification and autofocus can be used together. When autofocus is enabled and you activate the magnification mode, the camera will zoom in centered where the autofocus point is, as it always does, and the camera will also display a large AF box in the middle of the screen that covers about 40-ish% or something like that of the magnified view. Now, for all intents and purposes, this is the active autofocus area. Though, in my testing, I did find that the camera will occasionally focus on something that's in the frame and close to, but not necessarily inside the drawn autofocus box, if there is nothing else in that box for the camera to focus on. Now, as an aside, I do find this whole thing quite interesting, as the camera, when the camera is set to 15x magnification, the actual AF area is incredibly tiny, and the camera still focuses fine. However, when you switch the camera into, for example, APS-C mode in photo mode or enable movie cropping in movie mode, the AF boxes do become larger than they are when the camera is in full frame mode. Now, why this is all interesting to me is because there is a video out there of Canon USA's own Rudy Winston talking about the AF point sizes being large and changing due to technical limitations of using the on-sensor autofocus. Yet this problem doesn't actually seem to exist on the R5C when you shoot in crop sensor modes, and it doesn't appear to be an actual limitation here, as if you are at 15x magnification with autofocus enabled, the autofocus area is a mere 2.2% of the sensor's width, far smaller than the AF boxes that you have in APS-C mode. In any event, getting back to magnification. It, of course, also works with manual focus lenses and when a lens is set to manual focus mode. And I suspect this is most likely where most people will probably use it. Now, that said, when magnification is enabled in manual focus mode, all of the manual focus assisting functions are disabled. That is, both the manual focus guide and the focus peaking are turned off, and you are left to judge focus completely by eye. Now, this is probably what most people will want, and I quite honestly don't see it as being that problematic. It is something to be worth being aware of. And this brings me to one final point with the magnifier. You can have the camera automatically activated if a manual focus operation is made after one-shot autofocus is completed. The setting for this is found on the AF4 menu page under Lens Electronic MF. And when this setting is set to the third option, one-shot arrow enabled with magnify in parentheses, after the camera has completed one-shot autofocus and has locked focus, if you turn the focus ring on the lens, the camera will magnify the image as you make those focus adjustments. Now, unfortunately, what doesn't exist here is a timer to return you back to that 1x zoom level after you stop focusing. That said, you can still take a picture while zoomed in, so if you're comfortable that your composition hasn't changed, you can make the focus adjustment and then just shoot the picture from the magnified view. So that wraps up this look at magnification and focusing, I should say, as a focus aid on the EOS R5. And quite to my surprise, this actually ended up being a lot longer and more complicated than I had expected when I started. In any event, if you found this useful or at least interesting, let me know by hitting that like button. If this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing if you're not already. Finally, if you'd like to directly support this video and future content like it, please consider hitting that thanks button if you can, or buying yourself something you've always wanted from one of the affiliate links in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.